Welcome into the Commanders Report. I'm your host, Jack Sperry, and on today's show, I've got 5 moves that I think are relatively realistic here that I think the Commanders could actually pull off before the start of training camp in 2024. Before we get into my 5 moves today, make sure you get down there in the comments section and get us started by answering this question. How would you grade Washington's offseason to this point? You get Adam Peters as your new GM, Dan Quinn as your new head coach, you get Jaden Daniels as your new QB, you have the most signings in free agency this year of any team in the National Football League. Let me know what you guys thought down there in the comment section, A, B, C, D, or F, to get us going today. Now, a little bit of a disclaimer here before we get into my list. I am not predicting that all 5 of these moves are actually going to happen, okay? I'm saying that these 5 moves are moves I could see happening at this point in the process. You have to understand that a rebuilding team like the Commanders are probably not looking to make too many big moves before the start of training camp, but these are certainly 5 moves that I could potentially see GM Adam Peters pulling the trigger on here to make this Commanders roster better. So let's start out here with probably the move that I would make right now, and that's to sign a number 1 corner if you can find one, okay? And the thing that you have to know about the Commanders' defense under Dan Quinn and now Joe Whitt Jr., the defensive coordinator and play caller, is that it's very physical in terms of the outside cornerback position. And when you try to play physical and aggressive the way that they want to, you have to have a pretty good amount of talent. And Emmanuel Forbes is somebody that I think could fit in really nicely as a number 2. But, you know, the guys to complement him on the outside, Michael Davis, who they clearly brought in free agency and they like, and then Benjamin St-Juste. I mean, I'm personally not really high on those 2 because I think they have their shortcomings. And I think that this team could certainly benefit from bringing in a number 1 presence, and I think that would help tremendously. Now, you might be saying, Jack, we are in freaking June. Like, what are we going to do about getting a number 1 cornerback? The draft is already passed. Free agency has run its course. There's pretty much no one trading players right now. So what are you suggesting to go out and get a corner? Well, I think that there are some pretty decent options out there that have been number 1 corners, at least in the past. Stephon Gilmore, formerly with the Cowboys, Xavier Howard, formerly with the Dolphins, not too recent, or actually pretty recently, has been a legit number 1 corner in the NFL. Kind of had a down year last year, and then same thing goes for Adoree Jackson, who was with the New York Giants last year. But the guy out of this group right here that I would go out and get and I would be personally interested in is Stephon Gilmore. Now, if you've watched the show for a while, you know that this is a move that I have been suggesting the Commanders make for literally months at this point. And I'm still kind of left scratching my head why the Commanders haven't brought in Gilmore, because I feel like it is a perfect fit for this football team. In this same scheme with Dan Quinn as the defensive coordinator there in Dallas last year. He was a number 1 cornerback in that scheme when Trayvon Diggs went down with his injury. And then also because he's an older player like Bobby Wagner, who they clearly cherish in this defense, they would bring in Stephon Gilmore, who's also an older guy that could be a mentor to the younger cornerbacks in the room. I cannot think of a better person for Emmanuel Forbes to learn the position and learn the ropes of being an NFL pro than Stephon Gilmore, who has been a former defensive player of the year, who was a number 1 corner as recently as last year. And at this point in the offseason, guys, he wouldn't be too expensive of a player to go out and get. Now, the potential hang-up here with a potential Stephon Gilmore signing is that he doesn't want to come to the Commanders because at this point, he's no longer a young man, and if he's going to, put his body on the line at this point in his life, he is going to do it for a team that has a legitimate chance at winning a title. And, I think that the Commanders could maybe sneak into the playoffs this year, especially if Jaden Daniels is a really good quarterback right out of the gate. But, I don't think Super Bowl is in their future here for at least the 2024-2025 season, and that might turn Stephon Gilmore off to potentially come to the nation's capital. But what say you guys? Let me know down there in the comment section. If you were GM Adam Peters and Stephon Gilmore was open to coming to the Commanders, would you sign him? Type S for sign or type P for pass. This is going to be the pinned comment on today's show, so YouTube's going to throw you an ad break here in just a couple of seconds. And when that happens, take advantage of that time by giving me an S or P down there in the comments. Another thing that I would do here is that I would sign an offensive tackle. Because right now this position, as you guys know, if you've been watching the channel, I am not optimistic about the future of the tackle position here, at least heading into the 2024 season. Cornelius Lucas has been a fine swing tackle throughout his career. He's never been a full-time starter. And when he has been asked to be a starting tackle in this league, he's been okay, but, he gave up 3 sacks against a good pass rush in the Dallas Cowboys last year. Andrew Wiley gave up 9 sacks throughout the totality of the season. Didn't really have a great season last year either. Nick Allegretti and Tyler Biadasz and Sam Cosmi, I guess, are better than the tackle situation. And of course, you bring in Brandon Coleman, from TCU in the 3rd round this year. But honestly, man, he didn't have a great Senior Bowl. He didn't have a great season last year in the Big 12. Had a really low Pro Football Focus grade and just didn't look great on film. So right now, I think the tackle position is definitely looking pretty bleak. And I think another veteran added to this group, it certainly wouldn't hurt. All right, I think that even if that guy stinks, that guy, you're right where you are right now with Cornelius Lucas and Andrew Wiley. So at this point, I feel like there's really nothing you can lose by bringing in a veteran. And there's 2 guys that are still on the market that have played a lot of football and a lot of high-end football throughout their career. David Bakhtiari, still one of the best pass blocking of left tackles in football when he can stay healthy. And then Donovan Smith, who has won a number of Super Bowls over the last 4 seasons, 2 Super Bowls to be in fact. He won one with Tom Brady in Tampa, and then he won one with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs just last year as the starting left tackle. So I think that both of these guys would be big-time upgrades over what you already have. And honestly, I would consider bringing maybe even both of them in if you could swing that and get rid of Andrew Wiley, because I'm not a big fan of Wiley's game. But it looks like if you're going to bring in a tackle, it's probably going to be one of them. So the guy that I would want to bring in is David Bakhtiari. I know that he's injury-prone, guys, but listen, if he gets injured, you're right back to where you are now. So it's like, there's really no loss that you can get from bringing in Bakhtiari because David has not signed yet. There's obviously not much of a market for him right now, so I think that this would make a lot of sense for the Commanders, but I think the more likely option, because I think Bakhtiari probably wants to play for a competitor, Donovan Smith, all right? And Donovan is somebody that had kind of a down year last year with Kansas City. He's had kind of a down year the last 2 years, honestly. His final year in Tampa Bay wasn't all that great either, but this is somebody that is played on really good football teams. He'd be a good culture fit here in Washington, in my opinion, and I think he's an immediate upgrade over Cornelius Lucas and Brandon Coleman at this point in time. And at this point, protecting Jaden Daniels is the number 1 priority. Number 3, realistic move on my list here is if you're not going to go out and get a David Bakhtiari or get a Donovan Smith in free agency and you want somebody a bit younger, somebody more up and coming, Dan Moore Jr. from the Pittsburgh Steelers is somebody that I could see get traded this offseason. So Moore is a 4th-round pick that was back in 2021, but he's started pretty much every single game since he was drafted at left tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, the Pro Football Focus grade, throughout his career hasn't been fantastic. Last year, he ranked 63rd out of 81 tackles in the game. So maybe not the best Pro Football Focus grade in the world, but he's still a really young player with long arms, great size, good athletic profile. This is certainly somebody with a lot of experience and still a lot of upside as somebody that's still relatively young in this league. And if you don't believe me, believe his offensive line coach that he trains with during the offseason, Duke Manyweather, who's known as the best offensive line coach on the planet. This is what he had to say about Dan Moore Jr. in the offseason he's currently having. Every year, people are looking to replace him, but there's something to be said about the way Dan goes about his business, the way he prepares, and the way he's gotten better every single year. I think the coaching staff and I think the front office respects that, but there's a lot more good and average baseline in the NFL than there is elite. You can make the argument that Dan Moore has kind of exceeded expectations for where he was drafted in round 4. I'm excited to see it because I think this offseason so far, it's been his best. Really mature in terms of the way his body's looking right now. He's always worked really hard, but I just see a different sense of urgency in the way he moves, and just like some of the grown man's strength is coming. And the best part about getting a potential starting left tackle type like Dan Moore Jr. is that he could potentially come cheap for the Washington Commanders. Now, last year, the Steelers traded one of their starting offensive linemen in Kevin Dotson to the Los Angeles Rams for this package right here, okay? So if this trade would go down and it was the exact same package that the Steelers got for and that the Rams sent to the Steelers for Kevin Dotson, it would look like this. The Steelers would get a 4th-round pick in 2025, and then also a 5th-round pick in 2026 and then the Commanders would get Dan Moore Jr., and they'd downgrade those picks that they sent over to the Steelers. So the Commanders would essentially get Dan Moore Jr., and they would downgrade with a couple of pick swaps in future NFL drafts. It's not that much of a price, guys, if you look at the trade chart and the value and all that stuff. So getting a potential starting left tackle, this might be something that the Commanders should look at. But let me know down there in the comment section, would you accept this trade if you are the Washington Commanders? Type A if you would accept it, or type D if you would decline it. Now, maybe a little bit more of a spicy name here. Trade for Brandon Ayuk. Now, we've talked about this potential idea here on the show throughout the week, ever since Brandon called up his friend Jaden Daniels to tell him, 49ers don't want me anymore, pointing to a potential trade. So listen, when it comes to Brandon Ayuk coming to the Commanders, I think this is probably the least likely move on this list. All 5 other moves I have on today's list I think are more likely than the Commanders landing Ayuk in a trade. However, if the Commanders end up adding a receiver this offseason, I think it will be Ayuk. Because why? Because of that awesome connection that he has with quarterback Jaden Daniels. These guys are boys going back to their time, going all the way back to Arizona State, where Jaden Daniels was the quarterback there, and he was throwing passes to Brandon Ayuk in college. That's just how long Jaden was in school. But, these guys obviously have a great connection. They work out together in the offseason. They know each other's tendencies, all that great stuff. So if you're going to add a wide receiver and Brandon Ayuk is available via trade, that might be the one piece that could really take this Commanders wide receiver room to the next level, where I think Ayuk would be the 1A to Terry McLaurin's 1B. Now, Terry is a legit number 1 receiver, but because of the chemistry that Ayuk already has with Daniels, I think Ayuk probably would be the true number one option here. And then Jahan Dotson would fill in perfectly there as one of the best wide receiver 3s in the game. So you could make an argument adding a Brandon Ayuk, who Jaden is already super comfortable with, is a great move for this football team because it gives them the best possible weapons to work with. Now, it is important to note here, okay, and I can already sense that people have already put stuff in the comments blasting me for this. Under no circumstances can you make this trade for Brandon Ayuk and have it hamper your ability to build out the rest of the roster, to improve this offensive line throughout the next couple of years, to get better at the cornerback position, to really make sure Jaden Daniels has a complete team and not just one of the best wide receiver rooms in the land. So I think that this is something that could work out for Washington. You wouldn't be giving up any first-round draft picks. Giving up 2 seconds isn't nothing, but hey, if you're going to get a second-team All-Pro receiver, you're going to have to pay something. So 2 second-round picks in De'Ami Brown, I think is more than a fair offer to give the 49ers. Now, would that be the highest offer that the 49ers get? I don't know. There's going to be a lot of other teams vying for Ayuk's services if he is, in fact, on the trade block. But I think this is probably something a framework that could potentially happen here if the Commanders are able to land Ayuk. Then we get to my final realistic move here, and this might be the most likely option here, is that the Commanders bring in another kicker to compete with Ramiz Ahmed. Of course, earlier this offseason, the Commanders ended up signing and then releasing Brandon McManus after sexual harassment and assault allegations were made against him. Apparently the investigation the Commanders did into that found, that McManus shouldn't be on this team anymore. We'll just leave it at that. But then after that, they brought in Ramiz Ahmed, formerly with the Birmingham Stallions with the UFL. They brought him in after a kicker injury earlier in the year, and then they ended up cutting him before the end of the season. And it looked like the Commanders were trying to hone in on Jake Bates, who was the top kicker in the UFL this year, but he has signed with the Detroit Lions instead of the Commanders. So now, the Commanders are probably going to be looking at a couple different NFL veteran options, a couple of UFL options. And that's what I expect here, is that I think that they're going to be very extensive in their search to try to find their next starting kicker. And, because Bates has gone to the Lions instead of Washington here, I do think Ahmed's chances of being the week 1 kicker for the Commanders have gone up. But with all the UFL kickers now available to sign, and then you still could go out and get Randy Bullock or something like that if you want, I think that's probably what the Commanders will do. And personally, guys, if it was up to me, I would go get Randy Bullock, right? You've got kind of the younger guy in Ramiz Ahmed, who's made a 61-yard field goal in the USFL two springs ago. Go out and get somebody with a little bit more experience, a little bit more of a veteran presence in Randy Bullock, who's been a kicker in this league for a very long time. I think that'd be a nice little battle for these guys to duke it out in training camp this year. Now, let me know down there in the comments section, which move, if any, do you see the Washington Commanders making before the start of training camp this year? Do you think they'll sign a corner? Do you think they'll trade for an offensive lineman or a receiver? Do you think they end up signing a kicker? Let me know down there in the comment section. What do you think Adam Peters has up his sleeve before camp? And before we go here, if you've made it to the end of today's show, I really do appreciate you. You are a Commanders Report Real One. So I want you to identify yourselves. Down there in the comments section, type Real One in all caps if you made it to the end of today's show. And without further ado, guys, make sure you click that subscribe button because it is the end of today's show. But don't worry, we got another great Commanders video coming your way tomorrow. In fact, tomorrow it's going to be Commanders Report Live starting at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So make sure you join us for that. Because we're going to have that mailbag. We're going to have a couple of awesome segments. We're going to have some fun here with our live community here on the Commanders Report. So if you want to check that out, make sure you click that subscribe button right now.